This is a WMUR Commitment 2024 special in partnership with the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, Conversation with the Candidate. And now, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie.
Hello and welcome to our Conversation with the Candidate series. I'm Adam Sexton. Our guest is former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. We'll be getting to know the Republican and where he stands on some key issues. At the start of our show, I'll be asking the candidate some questions. And then after a break, we'll have our studio audience ask their questions in a town hall format. But before we begin with that, let's take a quick look at the candidate's biography. Chris Christie served 2 terms as New Jersey's governor from 2010 to 2018. During his time in office, Christie's administration focused on fiscal responsibility, job creation, and education reform. He also oversaw his state's response to the disaster caused by Superstorm Sandy. Before his 2 terms as governor, Christie was the U.S. Attorney for New Jersey from 2002 to 2008, prosecuting dozens of high-profile cases, including several state officials for corruption. He also worked in private practice as a partner for Cranford Law Firm. Since his time in public office, Christie has been serving as a political analyst for ABC News. Christie, who previously ran for president in 2016, said during his campaign launch he believes he is the only candidate who can stop former President Donald Trump from reclaiming the Republican nomination. The former governor led President Trump's commission on combating drug addiction and the opioid crisis. Christie is a graduate of the University of Delaware. He earned his law degree from Seton Hall University. He and his wife, Mary Pat, have been married since 1986 and have 4 children: Andrew, Sarah, Patrick, and Bridget. Governor Christie, welcome back to Conversation with the Candidate.
Good to be with you, Adam.
Thanks for being here. So the Dobbs decision took what had been settled law and turned it into unsettled politics. We just saw in Ohio, voters there overwhelmingly rejected a ballot measure that would have raised the bar for constitutional amendments. They've got one coming on codifying abortion rights there. Ohio is pretty much a red state now. So is the Republican Party getting too far out of step with a decisive majority of Americans who seem to be pro-choice?
Well, what I think should happen here is exactly what Dobbs has prescribed and what you saw happen in Ohio last night. The states should make this call. Each state, one at a time, with its people, should be able to make these decisions. And this is not an issue that the federal government should have ever been involved in. And for 50 years, the federal government took this away from the people of the individual states. Now it's been given back by the Supreme Court, and each state's going to make their own call. And I think what Ohio shows is that you never know what a state's going to do. And what its people are going to do. And for instance, in Oklahoma, you have no abortion at all except when the life of the mother is threatened. In my home state of New Jersey, you can have an abortion up to 9 months. So there's going to be a lot of divergence around the country. Let's go through that process and see if there is a national consensus. But the state should make this decision, Adam, not the federal government.
So if an abortion bill landed on your desk, either way, as president, you're a veto.
Oh, it's never going to happen.
Okay.
I mean, you're going to need 60 votes in the United States Senate to get anything to my desk. I'm pro-life. I've always been pro-life. I feel strongly about this in my public life, and I'll continue to advocate for life. But that's different than having the federal government set a rule for all 50 states.
As noted in the biography there, you were a U.S. attorney. If you were still in that position and you had a criminal defendant who had an order essentially on bail say, don't talk about this case, and they said something to the effect, if you come after me, I'm going after you, I'm guessing that person would probably have their bail revoked and be behind bars. But what about when that person is Donald Trump?
Well, they're not going to revoke his bail, okay? But I do think that the bigger question, again, we get caught up, Adam, in these legalities. But he's a candidate for president of the United States. So talk about his conduct. Let's talk about the conduct of somebody who sends out a social media post, if you come after me, I'll come after you, while he's a criminal defendant in 3 different jurisdictions. Think about it, Adam. 2 weeks from now, we're going to be on the first debate stage in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And if he shows up, he's going to be out on bail, most likely in 4 different jurisdictions. Is that the conduct and character of somebody we want as president of the United States? To me, that's the much bigger question than each individual legality. I've done it, I can do it, and I can analyze it for you whenever you want. But ultimately, he doesn't deny the conduct, and that's the problem.
Let's ask you right now about something that a lot of people are talking about, and that is the conduct of people peripheral to the presidency. What would you do as president to stop family members of the president or vice president from enriching themselves due to that proximity to the office?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't do what Donald Trump did, which was employ his family in the federal government. His daughter and his son-in-law, who then 6 months after they left, first of all, they made tens of millions of dollars while they were in government service, and then when they left, got $2 billion from the Saudis. That's grifting. Joe Biden, the same way, when he was vice president and president, using access to empower his son to make millions of dollars. The way I would make it is very clear. I would say to every member of my family, there is no getting involved in government in any way, either from the inside or from the outside. You are not going to be selling access to me, nor are you going to have a job inside this government. It's wrong. Family should be family. They should not be employees, and they should not be grifters trying to make money off of the accomplishments of another family member. And that's all. It's not their own talent. It's not Hunter Biden's talent. It's certainly not Jared Kushner's talent. It is the fact that they're benefiting off of the achievements of Donald Trump and Joe Biden. That's why both of them have to go at him, because they don't even have the moral wherewithal to look their own family in the eye and tell them, don't benefit from the American people. It's wrong, and I would make it very clear there'd be no one in my family who would benefit from my government service, except when I'm president, then come to the White House on 4th of July and watch the fireworks. Other than that, no dice.
All right, Governor Christie, this was the easy part, as I like to say. Now to the town hall voters.
Thank you, Adam.
Coming up after the break, we'll bring our studio audience into this conversation. Stay with us.